Hello, everyone. This is Conversations with Rob. Please like and subscribe our videos on YouTube. Also, listen to us on the air with, obviously, you'll be doing that if you already know of us on YouTube. So we appreciate that, and we appreciate you sharing all of our interviews here on YouTube, too. I have a special guest today. It's Ed Dodge. He is an MD and a doctor, and he's got an amazing story to tell about Africa and living a healthy lifestyle. So, Mr. Dodge, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come on the program. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Right, so tell the viewers a little bit about you, and then we'll get more into the thick of things as the interview rolls on.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Angola, Africa, back in 1940s. I'm pretty old, yeah. And it was at that time Angola was a Portuguese colony, and it was pretty undeveloped. We lived in the northern Angola. It was in a wild country, and my dad was a missionary, but he took one day off a month to go hunting, and he'd hunt for buffalo, African buffalo, and deer and so forth. And I went with him, and so had a lot of adventures in Africa like that.
Right. So I want to get more into that. So growing up in Africa, I mean, you know, I'm 29. We've seen throughout my years the technology boom of computers. I remember 8th grade, I got a flip phone, and that was a big deal to me. And now we're on all kinds of smartphones, and even more complex than that. They're huge phones. They're almost like TVs. So you growing up in Africa, in the continent, and then in the country of Angola, not even having that type of technology. And you said it was even less than what was going on in the U.S. Can you talk about how is it to live in that type of area where there isn't a lot of technology, no phones, obviously there wasn't cell phones, but no regular phones. And basically you're on your own pretty much as far as food, and there's no supermarket down the street.
Yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, we didn't even have airplane travel routinely back then. We came over by boat, ship, and it took mail about 3 months for us to send a message to family in the States, and then another 3 months to get a message back. So it was 6 months between communications, which is amazing. In today's technology, you get it instantly.
Right.
Part of the time I grew up in Luanda, which was the capital city, but part of the time we were up in the interior, in the area called the Dembos, and we lived in a mud and stick house like the natives, except we had a cement floor. We had running water. But there was a schoolboy running water from the spring to our home, and we boiled our water to make sure it was safe. We had a kerosene refrigerator that the drum of kerosene had to be brought up from Luanda once a month by truck. When the refrigerator didn't work, we used fresh food or dried food. And and no TV, obviously. Everything was real life.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I definitely, from hearing what you're saying, can appreciate all the stuff that we have now with technology, and even the stuff before, what's coming out now. It's incredible from what you're saying. I mean, you did talk about the differences between the U.S. as far as not having airplanes, not having TV, all that stuff. But when you came back to the U.S. to live, was it like a culture shock? Because you were over there for quite a few years. And then coming back to, it's like a totally different society, totally different way of life. How was that culture shock to you?
It was culture shock. I was 14 when we came back to the States, and I enrolled in high school. I started 10th grade here in the States, in New Jersey, Ridgewood, New Jersey. I was, I spoke English, obviously, but I did not understand the culture at all. And the kids didn't understand me. The only sport I was used to playing was football, which was soccer.
Soccer, yeah.
And at that time, soccer was unknown in the United States. The people didn't. Today it's hugely popular, but back in 1950s, no schools played soccer at all. So I didn't play baseball. I didn't play basketball. And so I was the last kid chosen for any teams when we had the PE and so forth. So yeah, it took about 3 years for me to begin to adjust to being in the States and feel like that maybe I belong there.
So can you talk about in Africa the missionary work? I mean, we do see a little bit of that going on now with a lot of religious organizations going to Africa, taking young teens and even adults going over there and helping a lot of the kids because a lot of the problems that you even spoke about with the shortage of clean water, medical supplies that's going on now, and I'm sure it was basically going on when you were over there also. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, the emphasis that my father and mother had was education. They really wanted to get African kids educated well. Um, but in church and in many schools, the kids just sat on mats on the floor, um, and I sat with them, and so it was very primitive. But my mother was an excellent teacher. She taught basic education, literacy, and so forth. She also taught adult literacy for older people who wanted to learn to speak. We spoke Portuguese, which was a common language. The African language there was Kimbundu, and I learned a little Kimbundu, but not a lot because Portuguese was the common language. So yeah, and we walked about part of the time I went to the mission school, and part of the time I went to a school in town. We walked about 1 kilometer to school and back. My sister was 2 years younger than me. And so in Portuguese school, we learned all about Portuguese history and the fact that North Portugal was a great naval power back in the 1500s and 1600s. And so we don't learn much about that in American schools, but I learned a lot of Portuguese history.
So let me ask you this about the extreme poverty. We see that on TVs. They have, commercials about that. And we talk about missionary work when you were down there and, continuing into now. Was there a lot of extreme poverty that you saw in the country of Angola in general, or was it not so much in that country because the Portuguese had conquered that country at the time?
It was the most of the African villages were extremely poor. And later I worked in Ethiopia after I got my MD and Master of Public Health, and I worked in Ethiopia for a couple of years. This was in the 1960s. And even in the 1960s, Ethiopian villages were very poor. It was a lot of similarities. Today, most African countries have excellent education systems. Zimbabwe, where I've also worked, has universities that are, world-class universities. So today, education has gone a huge way from what it was when I was growing up there.
Well, we see that there is some great educational systems in North Africa, Egypt, those countries, as much as I know, in the northern part, Morocco. But now, where would the poverty be now? Since you're more of an expert on Africa as the continent than I am, that we hear about now.
Well, that's interesting. Today, poverty and it still exists in many villages in Africa, but a great percentage of the population has moved to the cities, so that the cities have become really large cities. There's still poverty in the cities also, but not nearly like it is in the villages. And that's also contributed to the health problems in Africa. Today, when I was growing up, the health problems were the classic tropical diseases, malaria, tuberculosis, leprosy, smallpox, and so forth. Today, there's still malaria, that's still a problem. But today, the big problems are the Western diseases, which we have exported along with our fast foods. Fast foods have become global. They're everywhere in the world, Coca-Cola and hamburgers, and Chick-fil-A type outlets and so forth. And with our Western foods, we now see a lot of Western diseases that we did not see when I was growing up. We saw diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, stroke, things that we did not see 100, almost 100 years ago.
Oh, I didn't even know that that was the case. I knew there was, we did export McDonald's and you can get those to those places all over the world. But I didn't know that they were suffering from the same, because I have heard, and maybe you've heard this or maybe you haven't, in some of these other countries like Canada, France, they might have McDonald's, but the meat is different as far as quality than the one we have here. But are you saying that it's the same as the meat that we have here? We ship that meat over from here, or?
Unfortunately, much of the meat is shipped from the United States or other Western nations. Some of it is grown there, and if it's pasture-raised meat, it is better than the farm factory farm meat that we get in this country. The factory farm meat is not healthy meat.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into that. Last question as far as in Africa, and we'll kind of get into that, but I want to get into this question. We talked about missionary work. We see, donations for organizations that help these kids and families that live in the villages in the continent of Africa and other continents all over the world where there's trouble, that we don't suffer as much here. How can we help these people that are so far away?
Well, there are some good non-governmental organizations that I would use.
Mhm.
Some of the church relief organizations are good. Doctors Without Borders is a good international medical organization based in France. It's excellent. So there's a variety of ways to contribute to make life better in Africa.
Right. So you did study medicine. What made you want to study medicine, growing up in an area as far as, being in the missionary or being in Africa? Is that why you kind of wanted to study medicine? Because you saw a lot of these issues as far as diseases in that continent, or what made you study it?
Well, health was obviously a big concern all the time growing up. I had to take quinine every day as a child to keep from getting malaria. And I saw kids with malaria and with typhoid fever. I saw kids with and adults with elephantiasis and diseases like that were so. The health was always a big issue, and I admired our mission doctor. His name was Dr. Kemp, Kemp, and I admired him greatly. So I wanted to do what he did.
Right. So you were an MD and you studied for that, and you were a medical doctor. We hear all this stuff with the election coming up in 2020. Healthcare was a big issue, not just now, but in 2018, and it's been an issue in this country for quite a few years upon end. We hear about Medicare for all. We hear about the healthcare system where there's still 30 million people uninsured. What's your opinion on the U.S. healthcare system?
Well, basically, it's a disease care system. It's not a healthcare system. I want to make it clear: American doctors are superbly well trained. They're excellent physicians, but they're trained to diagnose and treat disease. They're not trained to prevent disease, and that's where the key is to improving health in the future. We need to prevent. We can prevent 75 to 80% or even more of heart disease, cancer, high blood pressure, stroke, diabetes. We know the keys to preventing them, but we don't use them. We wait until the diagnosis is made, then we start treating them. And so what we're doing is we're treating disease in this country. We're not promoting health.
Right. Well, let me. I agree with you there, but let me ask a question this way. We see you're a world traveler. You've traveled all over the world, and as a doctor, a missionary, we see in different countries in Europe, they have their own problems with their healthcare systems. Where they may have to wait a little bit more longer, but they have to. Everybody has care. Nobody's going into bankruptcy. People can afford their pills. We see in this country where we have senior citizens cutting their pills in half. As I said, 30 million people uninsured. I do agree with what you're saying, but uh, what system and do you believe is better? I mean, we see all these other countries in the world have this kind of Medicare for all single payer system, whereas we have more of a for-profit system where you have to worry about the insurance companies if you're going to be covered. And Obamacare, in my opinion, was a step in the right direction, but it was also a giveaway to the insurance companies too. What is your opinion on that?
It's a very complicated situation. It's not only the insurance companies that there's a lot of overhead expenses going into just insurance, and even in Medicare, there's a lot of overhead. Medicare is a blessing for people over the age of 65. I think it's wonderful, but again, it's a disease care system.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't emphasize enough, we can turn around most diseases in a matter of weeks, somewhere between 2 to 6 weeks. Most diseases can be turned around if people are willing to adopt a healthier lifestyle, which is basically healthy nutrition and regular exercise and positive mental outlook.
Would you say that doctors being pushed by the insurance companies to push these pills out? I mean, we saw with the opioids crisis that there was so many issues with that. I have a family member that had their knee operated on. They just throw opioids at them and they didn't take them, but you could easily get hooked that way. For a dental issue, also they could give you opioids and you could get hooked on that. Do you feel like that's an issue that the insurance companies are pushing the doctors to give out these pills for money?
It's an issue. It's not the insurance companies that are pushing the medicine so much, although that's true, but it's the pharmaceutical companies that push the medicines.
Right.
They send reps to every doctor's office around the country, and a tremendous amount of the overhead in the pharmaceutical industry is partly due to research, tremendous cost for research, but also due to providing lobbying and providing doctors with the samples and persuading doctors to push their brand of pills.
Yeah.
There's a lot of studies on this, and there's no question that that's a big part of the problem.
I agree with you. And I mean, if you watch any of the news channels or even any TV network in general, we see all these pills are being pushed on commercials consistently throughout the day. I mean, and it's just sad that that money should be put into, as you spoke about, into research and development instead of pushing these commercials on TV. In my opinion, anyway, I think that's a big problem too. Where the money's going. But I do want to talk about healthy lifestyle. You brought this up with the factory farm and meat. That is a big problem in this country. We also look at the issues also in our food with the antibiotics, high fructose corn syrup, and they have all kinds of sugars and salts, and they make these complex names on the ingredients. When you look at an ingredients list on the back of a package, you see all these different names, and they're just different names for sugars and salts. How do we eat healthy with all these antibiotics, high fructose corn syrup, and sugars and salts in our food?
The key to healthy eating is to eat organic veggies and fruit as much as possible, and to minimize processed foods, especially sugar and flour products. Sugar is not healthy. It's pro-inflammatory. It induces inflammation in the body, and is a much greater contributor to causes of disease than most people realize. I eliminate sugar as much as possible in my diet. Very little sugar of any kind, and you have to look at labels carefully because a lot of foods have sugar added. When you look at the label, and if there's sugar added, I don't eat it. So minimize those processed foods and concentrate a lot on organic foods.
Right. So just the issue back with that is that I agree with you 100% on that. We do have, we're in a society right now where a lot of people are under the poverty line. A lot of people go to Dollar Tree because they have to, as far as buying food. And those people are getting the cheapest, crappiest food that, because it's only $1. So they're not getting the organic food. What would you say to people that are working? We talked about it, McDonald's, the service industry in general, that they can't really go to Whole Foods or these more organic stores and pay, $200 or $300 for a family of 4 on groceries every month because they don't have that kind of money because they got to pay their own bills.
I agree with you. That is an issue. That is a problem. Many organic foods are less expensive than they used to be. You can get organic carrots for almost no more cost than regular carrots. You can get organic celery, organic greens at not much over the conventional, and they're so much healthier for you. So I was go with those basic foods. I get corn, corn on the cob. You can get 4 ears for $1. Well, that's a good source of good food. But you want to make sure it's not genetically modified. Genetically modified foods are another problem.
Right.
So that's another huge area.
Do you feel like the only way, my opinion is the only way we can get this junk out of our foods is basically we have to get money out of politics in general, so they don't, all these big ag industry companies are controlling, what's on labels. I mean, we look at the label, and I'm sure this as a doctor. You look at a label and it says sugar, and it could say 10 grams, 16 grams, and all the other cholesterol, it says daily value. For sugar, there's no daily value. And you can look at any label, it's the same thing. I was watching a food documentary about that the sugar industry fought so hard to not have that daily value on there, and they won. So it's sad, but that's the way the cookie crumbles.
Yeah. They want you to eat as much sugar as you can. Soft drinks are a big source of sugar, and that's a huge part of the problem also. I think it's not wise to drink soft drinks or even diet drinks. Diet drinks are a problem also. I think it's water and good sources of healthy water are good. It's the food that our bodies were meant to consume. And but coffee and tea are fine. The coffee should be no more than 3 or 4 cups a day, but coffee up to that limit is okay. Tea is a wonderful drink. And most of it is actually healthy. So there's a lot of good alternatives to drinking sodas.
Right. I think it starts, and this is the last question on this topic before we get into something else. I think it starts with the brainwashing on TV. You see all these commercials with Ronald McDonald on TV with the kids, they have the kids' playhouse at the McDonald's. So right when you get young, when you're watching TVs, you see all these, they have all the Disney characters when you have the sugared cereals. I mean, they get these kids right from the womb, basically, and brainwash them to have all these bad sugary substances, whether it's soda, cereal, they even add it in yogurts now, all kinds of things. And go to McDonald's, Burger King, drink that stuff and eat that stuff too. And then you go to school, the school lunches, same thing. They have food like McDonald's food in there. They have pizza, soda, cookies. So, it's really sad, but that's a big issue in our country with those issues. I feel like they get the kids right from the womb. Do you agree with that?
I agree completely. It's a tragedy that the big food companies pitch their unhealthy foods to kids from a very early age on TV. Yeah, and kids get addicted very early in their life.
What is the biggest health crisis in our country that you see? Do you see diabetes, heart disease? Is that the biggest crisis? Or?
Well, diabetes and heart disease and cancer, stroke, high blood pressure, those are the big ones. Uh, uh, and all of those can be prevented. I've got, let me show you a book. I don't know if you can see it or not. It's called Eat to Beat Disease by Dr. William Lee, L.I., researcher at Harvard. He's done 40 years of research on the value of healthy food, and healthy foods can combat so many of the diseases that we have today, even cancer. And I've got a personal story about that. So I recommend this book very, very much. And then there's there's a number of other books. There's a book by Ocean Robbins called The Food Revolution, 31-Day Food Revolution. And in this book, there's all kinds of well-written stories about eating healthy and wise food choices and so forth. So this is another book that I recommend. So there's help out there if people know where to look for it.
Right. Lastly, you have written 2 books. Can you talk about them and what made you want to write those books?
I wrote Dan's story back about 2008, I believe it was, quite a few years ago. But I wrote it. I practiced medicine in this country for 20 years, so I'm familiar with treating diseases in this country. And I saw so many patients with heart disease and high blood pressure and heart failure and so forth. And I wrote Dan's story as a fictional story because I thought that's what would grab interest more, about a character who in his 40s realized that he was at high risk of a heart attack because his brother died of a heart attack just a couple years older than he. And that woke him up, and he began trying to figure out how he could live more healthy. And so Dan's story is what he did and how he found support for what he was doing.
Doc, last question I want to get up to, and this is something that's going on right now. It's breaking news. We just saw a couple of people on a cruise ship. Actually, I think the first American died from the coronavirus. And there's quite a few Americans now on that cruise ship in isolation. I believe about 4 and that are sick. And we've seen hundreds of people die so far around the world. We hear that maybe a research center in the UK may have some sort of control this with some sort of medication, but that's not fully developed yet. What is your take on the coronavirus? How can we as people in the United States, where now, as I said, people are infected, how do we worry about our own safety in this country? Because it's slowly coming over here now.
Coronavirus is a huge worldwide problem. There's no doubt about it. Its epicenter is in China. And it actually, my understanding is it was originally a animal virus. And then it jumped to humans in animal markets there in China. And so that's where the majority of the patients have gotten sick is the exposure to the animal sources of virus. But it has become human-to-human transmission is a problem today. And so that makes it a real worldwide problem. Fortunately, in the United States, it is a concern, but not nearly the concern it is for travelers overseas. So if you just have to be very, I would not travel to places like China or places where it's a big problem. If you stay, if you keep in contact with healthy people, communities primarily, your risk is extremely small. But if you have people coming from overseas as guests or something, you have to be very careful.
Well, the thing that I worry about is, I don't know where you're located, but we're in Orlando where we're filming this. And, you know, that's a huge hub with Disney, Universal, SeaWorld. There's millions of guests from all over the world and all over the country that are coming to this area. So, you know, for people that live in our area, what should we do? Whereas we're worried about people traveling, as you said, from all over the world.
Well, I agree with you. Orlando is an international hub, and so that is a concern there. I would, I would minimize going to events where there's thousands of people. Uh, I wouldn't go to Disney World at this time, uh, or to the other big attractions, because there's such a high risk of running into people might have the virus. If you know you're going to be in an area that's exposed, it's recommended that you wear a mask, and so because there is air-to-air transmission,
Oh,
and
wow.
and avoid direct contact with people who are sick.
Yeah. Thank you for that information. Lastly, do you think the doctors will have this some sort of control, or the NIH or whoever's working on this? I mean, I told you, I told the viewers too that they said in the UK that they're working on some sort of drug to help get rid of this. What do you think the estimate is on that?
Well, China, to its credit, the researchers have isolated the genome of the virus that causes, and they made that available to all countries around the world. And our research institutions are working with that genome, trying to develop a vaccine. And I suspect that they're going to succeed in getting a vaccine sometime in the next 6 months. And if we get an effective vaccine, that will be a huge. They're also working on medication, but that's probably not going to be as. That's going to take longer, and how effective that will be, I don't know. But I think the vaccine is more promising.
Okay. Thank you for that information, Doc. Lastly, where can people buy your book if they want to? And also, where can people learn more about you?
Amazon.com has my book. That Dan's Story is one book. I've got a couple other books out there, 10 Steps to Healthy Living, and so forth. I also have a website, and the website is entitled The Power of Lifestyle, all continuous, no spaces. thepoweroflifestyle.com. And that'll bring you to my website, and you can get all sorts of information about health, healthy living, and my books are on there too.
All right, Doc. Thanks so much. I appreciate all the information. I hope the viewers learned a lot. I know I did. And basically, if you're out, even whether it's in Orlando or any big city, just be careful and make sure you wash your hands and stay alert for sure. And Doc, thanks so much. Appreciate you having on the program.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Rob.
All right, we'll have you on again soon.
All right.
Thank you.